Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Odola TebeArowacho wash process Ethiopia from Say Coffee Roasters. And there's the box right there. And Say, based out of Brooklyn, New York, and they're a coffee roaster we've been featuring a little more regularly on this channel, and that's of course for a number of reasons, but probably the most notable of which being that their coffee is pretty easily accessible to us, as there's a coffee shop nearby that's been carrying a lot of their coffees, and it's made it very easy for us to get our hands on a lot of these coffees. And almost all of their coffees sound like our flavor profile. They tend to be more fruity, floral, cleaner cups of coffee. So this one was another one that caught our interest. Looking very much forward to discussing this one. This right here is day 34 of this coffee. The recipe we settled on for this coffee was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio at 208 degrees Fahrenheit, but you could probably push that even further to 11 to 12, and it was brewed through the V60. Say is one of the lighter roasting American coffee roasters. They're light American for the roast profile. And let's start discussing this coffee. Day 14, which was our first impression, and typical Say fashion, was just basically harboring a lot of potential, as my first impression of this coffee was somewhat muted. It was pretty citric, and that's not really surprising. That's the experience we have with so many Say's coffees, is that even though they say wait 2 weeks, we like to wait even longer, but love opening the coffee on week 2 to kind of see how the coffee will change from the first time we try it all the way until the next time we try it. So pretty citric overall, just harboring a lot of potential, not too much worth noting on this day. Day 21 went back and already felt that the coffee had significantly improved, but was still somewhat lacking. Reminded me a little bit of a pink lemonade, and there was a slight bit less acidity than typically experienced with a lot of Say's coffees, but for the most part, just still relatively tame. So we felt probably a couple of things, either some adjustments or even a little bit more time. Day 23 went back up to the temperature and was again already having a better experience, so we had already figured out at this point that, not surprisingly, with a lot of Say's coffees, they are better at higher temperatures. So the most prominent thing remains the citrus, and there was a little bit more lively of acidity, and kind of this secondary soft fruit characteristics was also in the background. A bit more subtle, complex, and just subtle as a whole more with this cup of coffee specifically. Day 25 ran it through the V60, and this was definitely the best experience we'd had, and that's when we stuck with the V60 throughout, as it was such an amazing cup of coffee on this day that we wanted to continue with it. Watermelon candy was in abundance with plenty of soft and delicate sweetness. Best day of the coffee to that point, and we continued on with that. Day 27 went back, and the watermelon candy is kind of an interesting, a little bit more complex thing, as it definitely does radiate a strong watermelon candy, but not to the extent that something like the blue raspberry from Luna did. This was a little bit more complex of a watermelon candy, as there was a slight bit of herbality, a little bit of florals to the kind of watermelon as well. They were in equal parts, and they were very present throughout the time you were experiencing that watermelon candy. So that's why it just made it a little bit more different. The experience was much more of a stone fruit-like experience as the coffee had cooled down as well, but pretty nice overall, especially on this day. Day 29, even better day to this point, as there was still a lot of that watermelon flavor to it, most reminiscent of kind of this watermelon lemonade, which made it a very enjoyable cup. Fair bit of acidity in the cup as well, and a lot of the soft and delicate peach in the finish as well. Day 31, best day of the coffee to this point, so we felt that the best of this coffee was probably somewhere between day 25 and day 31, as in this cup there was a pretty and distinct, what am I missing here? Wonderful red candy forward cup, as well as a pronounced finish, but we were still kind of highlighting that peachiness, as we love peachiness, so having the peachiness be in the most abundance on this day was the highlight of this day, as well as the cup of coffee to this point. Day 33 went back, and we'll kind of structure this cup of coffee specifically how we experienced it, as the coffee was citric first and foremost, and then there was a lingering lasting finish and a slight bit of this distinct melon candy, subtle florals in the background as the coffee cooled down, and then a slight bit of this stone peach fruit as the coffee had kind of settled. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And would say that this is a pretty typical looking Say tasting wheel, but let's go through it one by one. So we have 4 things at a level 4, the cleanliness, the sweetness, the berry fruit, and the citrus fruit. On this day it's probably toned down a slight bit to level 3, but on those peak days we had kind of mentioned it's definitely justified at a level 4. And cleanliness, definitely, that's not really surprising, and I think it's probably perfect at that level 4. Berry fruit, we've been highlighting the watermelon candy. Definitely equal parts present to the citrus, even if the citrus was the most consistent flavor profile in this cup of coffee. We'd still say that the prominence of both of these flavors were in about equal parts, so that's why they're both at a level 4. The stone fruit, when really pronounced, especially on that day 31, could have been bumped up even to a level 4 as well, but I feel like it's a little bit more subtle, so definitely a level 3 feels like a better fit for this. We highlighted the florals ever so briefly, but oftentimes I feel like the florals are a little bit underrated in a lot of these cups of coffee, so definitely justified at a level 3. Mentioned before that it's in kind of this equal part to the watermelon candy from time to time, so definitely see that. Acidity level 3, that one was a little inconsistent. There were some times where we felt like it could have been bumped all the way up to a level 4, and sometimes I even felt it could have been bumped down to a level 2, especially when brewed through the Chemex, but level 3 tends to be pretty typical for Say's coffees, but this is probably on the slightly higher end of that level 3, maybe 3.5, but given it was a little bit less acidic than a lot of the other Say coffees, I think that level 3 looks pretty good for it. Doesn't have the most lasting finish, so that one's definitely justified at level 3. Lighter bodied, not surprising, and the only other thing I kind of wanted to touch on is the caramel level 2. As there were some times when I was experiencing that peach, there was a slight bit of brown candy that was going with that as well, so felt that just wanted to kind of emphasize that and put that at level 2 to kind of round out the tasting wheel, but for the most part, I feel like this tasting wheel is a pretty accurate representation of what I was experiencing. Alright, overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This was pretty positive. Quite enjoyed this cup of coffee. Didn't enjoy it as much as the Nuna, which was the other wash processed Ethiopia from Say we'd reviewed recently, but still thought that this one was complex and structured enough to its own flavor profile that it still made it a very enjoyable experience. And I think that's what I'm kind of taking away between the two differences of these coffees was. This one was just a little bit more complex and a little bit more tricky as opposed to the other one, which was a little bit more straightforward and pronounced in its flavor profile. So if you're looking for something a little bit more complex, I feel like this one was just a little better fit for you, especially in terms of the citrus, as this one definitely skewed more towards that citric side of things as opposed to the other one, which was a very kind of more sweeter fruit sort of flavor profiled cup of coffee. And that leads us to the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. And I mean, Say's coffees pretty much tend to lean themselves towards a specific person. Again, lighter profiled cups of coffee, lighter bodied cups of coffee, complex cups of coffee, tricky cups of coffee, but this one specifically, keep an eye towards that citrus. If you're looking for a little bit of sweetness coming from some interesting berries, and this one definitely has that as well. Obviously some cleanliness and a fair bit of acidity, but not something that's going to overpower you. I feel like this one's a pretty good fit for you. I definitely enjoyed this one, even if it wasn't my favorite Say coffee of the year. Still very much an enjoyable cup of coffee. For the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Odola TebeArowacho. Odola TebeArowacho wash process Ethiopia from Say Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.